We love Zencaster because it allows us to record the audio for our podcast and create the video segments we use for our weekly Sister Scoop episodes. Zencaster has helped us make content capture simple.
It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencaster. Log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests, and feel a sense of zen knowing Zencaster's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable.
If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencaster's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast in one place and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations.
Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code SistersAssembled, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
Katie and I are always hungry, and one snack we both love is beef jerky. That's why we're so excited to tell you about one of our favorite jerky brands, Matt Hat Jerky.
Matt Hat's delicious taste makes it a great snack, and the variety of flavors, including original, black truffle, and my personal favorite, roasted garlic, means there's a flavor for everyone. Plus, it's local to the area where we grew up in, which we just love.
Use the link in the show notes below to get some Matt Hat Jerky for yourself, and make sure to use our coupon code SistersAssembled for 10% off. Hello and welcome to Sisters Assembled, your place for all things MCU. And as you know, we are deep, now a third or so. Yeah, a third of the way through Agatha all along.
You'll get there.
I never remember how many episodes there are, but there are 9 episodes and we just watched episode 3. So back on track. We're a third of the way through. And we are here to talk all about our reactions, give you some details that we've researched since we saw it, some theories and all that good stuff relating to the episode and where we might go from here. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Katie to kick off the episode.
I always have so much pressure on me when you do that. I am okay. I can breathe through it. Taylor was going to interrupt me. I can breathe through it. I loved this episode. I loved it because we're on the Witch's Road for the first time. Not that I didn't like 1 and 2, just as good. But I liked because now I feel as if I kind of understand the direction 4, 5, and at least 6, if not 7, are going to be. They're trials, right? And I'm assuming the next 3 to 4 episodes are going to be each witch's trial, and that makes up 5 of them. So this logically makes sense to me. But I really did like it. I thought it was interesting as we kind of get to dive deeper into these other witches, because that's something we didn't really get. But at the same time, the horror element is still there. I mean, that was really there. And, you know, you're still getting important points about other characters and just things are constantly happening. But yet I'm laughing. Yet I'm having the time of my life. Am I hiding behind my hands sometimes? A little bit. Like, I'm not going to lie about it. But I'm also genuinely enjoying watching the show. Like, this episode genuinely made me sit there and I was like, I can't wait another week. I'm annoyed I'm waiting another week.
Yeah, this is a really, really fun show. I think it's really smartly done, to your point. We're going to probably get, you know, a trial per episode. But I think what I really loved about this episode, you know, more so than 1 and 2, because 1 and 2 is just setting up the show in general, which I appreciate. It's bringing everybody together, reestablishing Agatha, you know, all of that good stuff. And I think it did it well, and I think it was paced well, and it didn't drag. Great. That's all I need from an exposition. Something that's paced well and gives me the information I need to actually dive into, you know, the real meat of the plot.
Right.
Now that we're here, I love that they didn't waste any time starting to hint at the backstory of the different witches. I think that was one of my favorite parts, you know, besides the fact that Mrs. Hart was amazing up until her very untimely death at the end of the episode. But she was hilarious. But other than that, which did make me cackle, and then, you know, the horror making me absolutely scream hysterically, like in terror, I really loved that we're starting to see, okay, what is in the back of Lilia's, you know, closet, if you will? What skeletons are back there? And why is she talking about these dead bodies? And who was that man who was, you know, holding Jennifer's head underwater, who seems to be also the man who bound her powers? You know, what happened really to Agatha's son, which I think is actually going to be critical in this show and one of the biggest mysteries that we're going to unravel along the road. And we'll talk about him, I'm sure, throughout this episode, because I know I have some tidbits to share about him. But I think what's really great is we were starting to get these hints that there are going to be pieces unraveled about each of these characters, and they didn't waste any time. It wasn't too much where you're like, all right, here's their whole backstory in an info dump, but enough to be like, ooh, let me start thinking about this, or let me start, doing a little bit of research on this character so I can get a better understanding of where they might be pulling from the comics. And I love that. It was the perfect amount of hint to get me intrigued without giving me all of the information right up front.
I agree. And I think it was interesting because while it was Jennifer's trial, we still were getting tidbits everywhere else about everybody else. And I think that was what I found really nice. I
Yeah.
guess is like a really good word to just use there. I found it really nice because it wasn't just focused on her. I don't know her entire story yet. I'm still more curious now because I know these pieces, but I still am like, well, what's going on over there with Alice in the steam room? Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out these other characters just as much. So, with all that being said, let's start at the beginning of the episode. And then I think the best way to kind of tackle this, because every character does a little bit of their own thing during the trial, is that during the trial, we go character by character.
Okay.
So, starting at the beginning of the episode. First off, we learn don't walk off the road. Probably a good point of advice that Agatha did not decide to share with anybody. Would I have walked off the road? Probably not, but Mrs. Hart was just doing her own thing, and that's okay. But the other pretty important piece, though, that we learned, other than Mrs. Hart having like a mental breakdown, which, girl, I get it. Like, she was like, this was not the girl's day or night I thought this was going to be. I want out of this.
False advertising.
Yeah, she was like, this actually sucks. Like, I thought we were just going to sing in the basement. And now here we are, and I really don't enjoy this. But we learned that it's called a sigil that is actually put on Teen, which is pretty much what I actually had guessed last episode when I was like, I think it's just meant for all witches to not know what his identity is.
Yeah. And I think that's a very important piece of information to your point that we got out of this episode. It is unclear who put it on. We have our guesses, but I think confirming that it's not just Agatha and that it's all magical people, I think also gives a lot of credence to our theory that he's not, only mildly powered. He, like Jennifer, is bound. I don't think he's maybe completely bound because he does seem to have the ability to do, some magic, and that's what got him more interested. But I do think he is in some capacity bound and his magic is not able to live its full extent. So I think this is just another, point to that theory as well. And that just that little scene kind of showed us so much about Teen and who he might be and what is going on with him.
I also think it's important to note he wasn't aware. And now we see him and Agatha interacting in the first 2 episodes, and we see it twice. We see it when he first tries to say his name, and then we see it when he's trying to tell his story, and Agatha cannot hear him. And that's kind of why we had said at the time that we weren't sure if the spell was blocking him just from Agatha or just from the entire witch community. And obviously that's been proven to be the witch community. But he didn't know. So the other important thing to me there is, other than the fact that he doesn't know, and that's probably an important piece of information in itself, he's clearly not around a lot of witches. Because somebody you think would have mentioned, hey, I literally cannot hear you say your name or hear you tell any part of your past. Doesn't work. And we saw how quickly those other witches all reacted, the ones in the coven. They immediately were like, whoa, what is happening here? So his background, I think, is even more intriguing to me now because I'm like, how'd you learn you were magical? How'd you get into all of this? How'd you find out about Agatha? How'd you figure all this stuff out? Because you know things. We see that even in the trial. He knows a lot of things relating to witchcraft. So I'm kind of intrigued because he clearly hasn't been around many witches or warlocks, if we also include everything and everyone under the sun, but he clearly hasn't been around many of them. Someone would have mentioned he has a sigil on him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it does say something about the environment in which he was raised, in that it's normal human, non-magical folk, right?
Correct.
Which, again, if we're talking about, we still don't know his name. This is now episode 3. Like I mentioned at the top of the episode, we're a third of the way through and he does not have a name. I think if we're going to continue to think he is Billy Kaplan, Well, being raised by normal humans is part of Billy's story. And so that's just another little clue that perhaps that is who we're talking about here. So that is important. I also think to what you were saying about, how does he learn that he has magic? Well, how does Wanda learn? Like she has obviously she's got the whole thing with the mind stone and is experimented upon, but then she just kind of figures out that she has magic, right? She sees it, she does something accidentally. I could see that being a similar kind of story for Billy slash teen, in that, he does something one day and he's like, oh my gosh, I just moved that with my mind, for example. And then he starts to get more interested. He seems like someone who is very studious. Like he carries around a notebook full of notes and he always wants to learn and he's very curious. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's entirely self taught, in that he's using what, could be considered not fairy tales, but like the opposite of fairy tales. And so he's like using those, what we would consider as fantasy, as textbooks, because realistically, in this world, isn't a lot of fantasy based on, hidden things. And so I think he's, entirely learning on his own. And now he has these women who are, some of them hundreds of years old, practitioners of magic, and he can learn at a much more accelerated pace, which I think wasn't even part of his calculation when he was talking about going on the witch's road. He was just focused on, I need more power, I want more power, because there's got to be more than this. And now he found all these teachers who are both wittingly and unwittingly teaching him about how to master witchcraft and different, skill sets within it.
You say a lot of really important points there, and I agree with all of them. I think he's an interesting character for that reason because he, compared to the rest of them, does not have a lot of knowledge across the board, yet he is a study. He's sitting there and he is paying attention to everything they do. He wants to learn more. And you actually kind of jogged something in my mind when you said that, because there was one other scene before we went into the trial, which was weird. And I can't remember which person had said, I hope that's it, or something. It might have actually been Mrs. Hart when the trial first appeared, the house. But he said, well, I hope not, or something along those lines. And I wouldn't have thought twice about it until I got the reactions of some of the other witches that were looking at him a little weird, including Agatha, who was picking up on the fact that that seemed a little weird, that he's quite so excited to be on the witch's road the way he is.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly who said it, but you're right. Someone was like, oh, maybe we just made it to the end of the road. And he was like, yeah, I hope not. And so, to your point, they're all here trying to survive so that they can get what they want. But he's out here having the time of his life because he's never been exposed to magical people who, at the very least, are doing it out in the open, who are masters of their craft. For him, this is like a master class with, some of the most legendary, well, Agatha at least, some of the most legendary witches in North America, and then plenty of other very, accomplished witches in their own right, as we learn about Jennifer within this episode, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But for him, this is just, I am having the opportunity of a lifetime. Who the heck cares about all the danger? I'm sure these ladies will keep me safe.
Or is it? I said last episode, as far as I'm concerned, I love Agatha to death, and I'm ecstatic we're going to learn more about her history, and that this clearly showed that, because that was something I also talked about last episode, was I wanted to understand how she got the Darkhold and all that, which we're getting there. But I also talked about this essentially being Teen's show. At the end of the day, he's assumed to be a character in which we think there is a project coming up for him. I don't know where Agatha's going to go after this, but I have an assumption of where I think Teen is going because of who I believe him to be. So now we have this kid who pretty much begs Agatha to go on the witch's road, to take him with her, more specifically, and now he's very, very excited to be on the road. Maybe it's just being a young kid who wants to be on the road, wants to experience it. We find out later he's actually not a member of the coven, which maybe everybody knew. I was not following that, so I was like, oh, I guess he's just not a part of this. The other 5, and then there's him. But he actually really doesn't have anything at stake here, because he theoretically should not have a trial because he is not a member of the coven. He could just be innocent. He could just be excited. Fine. I mean, it's also like the definition of everybody in the group doing all of their work, and then you just have to present it, right? Like, he gets the power at the end, but everybody else gets in there. Or he's smarter than we think he is. There's a little bit more of a motive behind him than we assume. He might be a little bit more aware than we're thinking. Maybe he knew that that sigil was on him. We don't know. He could literally be pulling all of us right now.
I mean, think about who his mother is at her worst, right?
And I don't even mean in an evil way. I just mean he knows what he wants. He's aware he's being held back, and he knows this is the way to do it.
But think about Wanda. Why did she go for the Darkhold? Because she wanted her children. It didn't start because she wanted control over the multiverse. She didn't want to kill the Illuminati. That wasn't her goal. They were standing in the way of her ultimate goal, which was her children. So I could see how, like mother, like son, what starts as a relatively innocent goal, because, I don't think he's trying to go out there with his magic and rule the world. He just wants the power he feels he should have. That's fine. There's nothing inherently evil about that. But in doing that, what does he have to do? He has to lie. He has to manipulate. He's learning from Agatha, who's the best at both. So, it is going to be interesting to see if he's able to keep this kind of well intentioned good guy persona that he kind of has right now. He's the like little innocent kid, but is that going to be a facade that's cracked? Is that something that's going to evolve as he spends more time with these witches who are already stabbing each other in the back? That remains to be seen.
Exactly. And that's why, again, maybe he's totally innocent and I'm just putting something out there, but I watched WandaVision. I didn't know Agatha was going to be the bad guy, right? Like, we all watched that. So, as far as I'm concerned, there isn't a real antagonist yet. You could theoretically say it's the Witch's Road, but there technically wasn't an antagonist in WandaVision either until Agatha showed herself, which was like the 6th or 7th episode. So, all I'm saying is the possibilities out there, and we have to kind of bring attention to it because we do have predictions and theories we threw out even last episode regarding where we think he goes, what he does, how this might end. So it is important to kind of make note, just like Agatha did, that he's a little excited to be on that road, a little too excited to be on that road. But let's move into the trial. And we'll start with Jen, actually, because it's hers. And I think that's the most important thing to do is start with the person whose trial it is because she's the main character during all of this. They get poisoned. Random side effects, but I was kind of living for the first few. I thought it was hilarious, low-key. But then the hallucinations start. And they all have very, very different ones. And we'll start with Jennifer because it's a man who attempts to literally drown her in the sink. But to what you kind of said earlier, after the fact, she points out that he might have been the reason she's bound.
Yeah. I mean, imagine the trauma. You're already like on the witch's road, and now you're like probably, it seems like reliving a very negative memory. Like, it's not just that it's there in the house with you, it's an actual memory. Now, Agatha's is a little weirder because it's more of a symbolic. We'll get to that in a second, but it's more symbolic. But with Jennifer's, it feels like it's an actual memory of hers that she is reliving with this man. And he's actually, like, it's not some just figment of her imagination. He's physically able to touch her. He's physically able, to your point, to try to drown her. And, she has to do this whole potion and lead it while also being tormented by this man who traumatized her and took away her magic.
And I'm so curious as to understand who he is. But that kind of wraps back to something you said even earlier. These witches are hundreds of years old. So this, and I believe she said she was bound for 100 years. I want to say in the first episode, some of those details are starting to get a little blurry for me. But that being said, I mean, that memory, she could be at year 90 for all we know. That memory could be 90 years old. Or even older. Maybe she wasn't even bound when that memory was taking place.
Well, and look at the way the man was dressed.
Exactly.
Like, he was not dressed in modern clothes.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I was going this direction of like, whatever this story is old.
Yeah.
And it's not who she is now. It's who she used to be. And so I think you have to open some doors down the road there to understand, okay, we could be in the 1800s.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What could that have looked like? Let's remember what witchcraft looked like, guys. Or the assumption of witchcraft. Let's remember what that used to look like. Agatha was literally going to get burned on the stake because she was in Salem and she was a witch. Granted, other witches were trying to kill her, but that's its own thing. Regardless, is it because she's a witch? But then I'd assume somebody else who's magical has to bind her. So is he a witch or did he have another witch bind her? Like, what's the story here?
Yeah, I think that's one area I definitely want to explore further. And I have no doubt that they will kind of close the loop on that because they, like I said, when I was kind of talking about my reactions, like, this was just the hint. This was just, hey, I'm giving you a little clue about exactly what we're going to focus on in the past of each of these characters. I think something else is important to note about Jennifer's past, and I'd be really, really curious to see how, or I am really curious to see how this kind of shapes up, is that, when Agatha's trying to give her pep talk, which is quasi nice, sort of,
I hate you.
yeah. She says to her, like, what you were doing was so powerful, so important. Don't ever forget that. That knowledge is still there. But I think what's important to focus on, other than, she still has the knowledge, is that she was doing something really what seemed like cutting edge with her potions. So I'm really curious, like, what was that? And was that the reason that she was bound, so that she was no longer able to do that experimentation, no longer able to build what could be cutting edge potions that could, potentially challenge someone's power or threaten someone who is maybe very powerful. And that's what we were seeing with that man who is the one potentially who bound her. Maybe he's just a henchman of someone who's like, hey, she's getting a little too close for comfort, or her potions are gonna do this, that, or the other thing, and it's really gonna be a problem. Or maybe she was evil in her past life and we don't know that, and she was doing something that was dangerous, and there is some sort of governing body, and this guy was kind of the enforcer for, hey, your potions are going to be dangerous, so now I'm going to bind your magic so you really can't do anything. I think that's going to be part of the key of understanding all of this, is what was she doing with her magic and her potions knowledge that was so potentially threatening that her magic got taken away.
Well, and even in that conversation, Agatha says what you were doing was important. And I don't mean any of this crap with your whatever she has, but I mean the real stuff. And that's why I never intervened. And so you kind of mentioning maybe she was evil. Maybe she was not necessarily evil, but I mean, I wouldn't even say Agatha's evil, a little. But some of that's the dark hold, and also some of it's just the fact that she is a witch that's, I would say, is more negligent and doesn't really care to follow the rules. Again, though, she's a siphon. She's different than the rest. She's not really like your day to day witch. So maybe she kind of towed the line. I would be intrigued. They clearly, again, they have history in some degree as well. And that might not mean they were besties, but clearly they knew of each other. They clearly ran around in enough of the close circles that they knew of each other. Agatha knew what she was doing and therefore didn't ever want to intervene because she found it important. So, yeah, I do want to understand. I want to get to the bottom of it, to your point. But I also want to, again, understand these relationships. There is a lot to these relationships that we're not getting.
Well, and I think something that you pointed out that's really interesting is, I want to understand, what is Agatha's goal? What does she find important? What about Jennifer's work does she think was so important that she was never going to go after her? That's what I'm curious about too. Like, we don't know enough about Agatha to be even able to take a guess at that. And so I hope that that's revealed too, like understanding what about Jennifer's work was something that Agatha was so aligned to that she would go against her very nature to leave her alone.
Exactly. So I'm intrigued by this relationship, especially because it's been made clear that they knew of each other at least. I mean, all the witches reacted to Agatha when she tried to come and find them for the coven, but that's also because she's Agatha Harkness. They know her name. It's clear in this interaction that Jennifer and her have more of a history than just Jennifer knows who she is.
Yeah, exactly.
But moving on to Lilia, hers was probably the freakiest. Hers, I'm gonna be honest, friends, didn't watch it all. I really wasn't sure the direction we were gonna go, and my boyfriend had turned, of course, all the lights off at that exact moment when the show was getting really creepy, and I was like, I'm good. I'm gonna just behind the hand for a little bit. I know she follows this like creepy girl in like an old timery dress, and that's how she gets away from Agatha. And then there's like dead body kind of things happening.
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it.
Yeah.
And then I think she says, like, oh, they're all dead. So I wouldn't be surprised if, like, that was her past coven and something happened to them or her family, or maybe that was something that she foresaw and she didn't stop, because if you tie it to her powers.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so it's definitely, she has a very, like Jennifer, they all do, but a very intriguing background. I really am excited to see, exactly what that shapes up to be in future episodes. But it also, to your point, like Jennifer's, it shows that she's older, but that guy, his clothes were maybe from the 1920s, 1930s. These clothes were probably from like the 1800s. So Lilia's like old in comparison to Jennifer. And I think that's interesting too, to be able to use these delusions to start to place like how old these witches actually are, because their physical appearance doesn't necessarily represent their actual age.
Right. And I mean, we obviously already knew that with Agatha, who's been alive since Salem time of what even was that? Like the 1600s?
16 or 17.
Yeah, like early settlers in America kind of idea. So I definitely think that's such an interesting point is that we don't know their ages and therefore their stories can be so different than what we would think of. Oh, well, she looks like she could be in her 40s. So thinking about the 80s and like what that could look. No, we are not even in the realm of like where we think we are. But to what you had said, I really like the idea of her power failing her or her not using it to the way she should have and her failing other people. And that's kind of her past, the shame. But I also think it would be interesting because we can't forget she sees visions. And some of it is definitely still the divination in her and like just her abilities. But also some of it's just like something's not right with her. Like her powers are not coming in correctly. And that's why even in the first episode, or I'm sorry, the second episode, but the first one in which we're introduced to her, you see that. Even Agatha's like, ooh, like, okay, girl, you do what you got to do. But we see when she does have a real vision, that's when she gives Agatha the names of the coven. And we see when she doesn't. We see what those other ones look like. She even had one this episode that was like, save Agatha. And Agatha was like, love the plan. Have to find the potion first. Let's focus on that. But I also wonder if her visions, these kind of more chaotic ones that don't seem planned or have an intention purposefully from her, are part of whatever happened with all those other people who are dead, which we're assuming are witches.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it too. I think the other thing is maybe she's still not fully in control. Like, I think something like that, I'm going to go back to Harry Potter because that's really my like big reference for divination, but that professor was kind of a mess, right?
Isn't it like Professor Trelawney?
Yeah, she's kind of a mess. Hermione hates her.
She ends up dead though. So like rest in peace, girly.
She does have though like two actual visions. Like basically it comes out that like a lot of what she does is like total BS and she's making it up. But Dumbledore says at one point like, "Oh, but she has had like two real visions. One was the prophecy about Harry, well, what became the prophecy about Harry, and then she has another one later on that I can't remember what it is." But I bring this up because when she does have a real vision, it's not something that she's doing intentionally. It comes to her, right? And so I bring this up because I think it comes into play two places. One, I wonder if Lilia not being able to save her coven, her family, whatever it is maybe because her divination was something that came to her once and she didn't know what it was. She didn't know how to act on it because it just came out of nowhere. I don't know that she was necessarily born with her divination gifts. Clearly, not every witch has them. And the other thing I want to point out is maybe that the reason that she hasn't fully learned how to control her powers is the shame that she feels because of her letting people that she presumably loved die. And so she never really spent time honing her gift to be able to control it. So that's something else that could be an interesting, theory is maybe she's punishing herself for something that she couldn't control when she was younger, so she just never tried.
That's a good point. I think I jump immediately to not that they're bad people, but that they did a bad thing because they're all covenless. And something that was really driven to me by Teen was how important it seemed to have a coven. He talked about it's like a sisterhood and, everybody has each other's backs. And obviously, again, Agatha's a rogue witch for a lot of different reasons, but it gave me the impression covens are a lot more important than we think they are because we've never actually seen a witch that has one. The Scarlet Witch is not going to run around in a coven. Like, literally no need to do that. She could make her own coven out of thin air if she really wanted to. Like, she doesn't need them. And then Agatha's her own lone witch because of her abilities and her track record. But these three other witches also don't have covens. So to me, I'm like, you're ostracized for one reason or another. And I think that's why I immediately jumped to they did something. Whether it was an accident or not, something happened in their past in which other witches don't trust them. Or, in Jennifer's case, she doesn't even have power. She doesn't have her powers anymore. She's bound. So, not much help in an actual usual coven, I would imagine. But also, she's bound for a reason, right? Like, somebody bound her for a reason. So, that's kind of where I'm at. Do I think that necessarily holds true with all of them? No, because then we go to Alice, who her vision makes the most sense to me because she's primarily bought into walking the road because she wants to find her mother who supposedly disappeared on the road. So that I fully followed with that being her mom. But I think the biggest thing that struck out to me was her mom kind of kept saying, she said her grandmother had died around the world or something like that, which was weird the way it was worded. And then she was saying something about they're coming or I can't save you or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think at one point it's mentioned that Alice's family, or at least the females in her family, are cursed. And
Yes.
so I think what I interpreted from that scene was the curse got grandma, right? And now her mom is next. And because it's genetic or passed down from witch to witch in that family line, her mom was saying, I can't protect you. There's nothing I can do to keep you from suffering the same fate that your grandma just did, that I am going to. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason her mom walked the road, right? Like, what was her motivation at the end? Maybe to break the family's curse, and she was never able to do it. So, yeah, to your point, I think Alice's was probably the most straightforward because we actually had these tidbits about her past and her family line, and she's so clearly driven by all of that. I think even, the little things that she was saying to Teen about her tattoo and how her mom made her get it, but her mom was not well. Like, there are just all these little breadcrumbs that we've gotten about her that kind of help paint that picture of why she saw that particular hallucination.
Yeah, and then to kind of wrap it into the point I was making prior to all this, she's the only one that I can understand her hallucination in regards to if she did something or if there's guilt or shame or somewhere in there. Because with the facts we at least know as of now, her mom, to what you said, walked the road and was supposedly lost on it. And maybe that is why she was walking the road to break that possibly generational curse. And we know that's kind of why she wanted to be on it. We don't really know if she has much shame beyond it as a witch. She just wants to find her mom and apparently not get cursed. I also think it's possible as they die, the curse starts coming for them. Because you mentioned she says her mom wasn't well. So if her grandmother had passed, the curse would have gone to her mother. And maybe that makes them go a little insane or kind of starts losing parts of their mind. And as witches, like that's really dangerous. That's kind of the big thing there is that is a very, very dangerous thing for a witch to not have full control over a mind because that means they don't have full control over their powers. And so I don't think the theory holds up with her, but I do think it'll be interesting when we explore her past a little bit more. And maybe there is some guilt or shame in there. Maybe she feels she hasn't tried hard enough or she even when she's talking to teens, she seems very like, about it. She said, well, my mom always said we were cursed. My mom, like, it almost kind of felt like she didn't fully buy into it. And so maybe that was part of why the hallucination got to her the way it was her mother pretty much saying, like, it's coming. You're next. It's coming for you.
Yeah, or even I kind of interpreted that as like a coping mechanism of her not really fully buying into the whole idea of witchcraft and that whole culture. She basically rejected it because it took away her mother and theoretically also her grandmother. I'm assuming it's a magical curse. So, because of that, she seems to have rejected basically the way that she was raised. And I wonder if that's kind of one, a defense mechanism, that whole I don't really care about any of this and I don't actually believe in it because now she's standing on the witch's road. So it's kind of hard to deny it.
Right.
But also, too, like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the source of her shame is that she did reject all of these things that her mother and her grandmother and theoretically their female ancestors before them all believed, and that she's the first one to kind of strike out on her own path and negate all of these things that were important to her matrilineal line.
And now she's on the witch's road, which is arguably probably the most witchy thing you could ever do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Let's get into Agatha. Maybe I'm dumb.
Do you want me to answer that question?
It wasn't a question.
Do you want me to respond to that statement?
No. Let's keep that one just hanging in the air. But in the very first episode, when Agatha's in her own mind under the spell still that Wanda put on her, we do see a child's room.
Yes.
I obviously saw it. My brain was like, but she's under a spell, so I didn't really connect anything to it yet because I was like, I can't trust what I'm seeing. I mean, Agatha can't even trust herself right now. She's literally in her head. She tried to drive a fake car that she made in her living room. Like, that's how bad this delusion was. And so I wasn't putting any money on this bedroom, on this child's bedroom, because at the time, again, can't literally trust what we're seeing. But then, Miss Jennifer shares some tidbits with Teen. Also name drops Mephisto. Not like we've
Ooh,
been waiting like
yeah.
3.5 years for that one. I literally was like, oh my God. And my boyfriend was like, why is that important? And I was like, we have to explain this later or we have to pause the show. There's no in between. Like this is not something I can just tell you right now. But Jennifer also brings up that there's a rumor that Agatha did have a son. And not only that, she supposedly traded him away for the Darkhold.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
go. Let's talk about this because this is a big deal. So, first of all, I think in the first episode when we see her son's room, it shows that his name is Nicholas Scratch,
Correct.
which is in fact comic accurate. We'll get to that in a second. She also had a bunny in the hex called Scratchy, so let's not forget Scratchy. And Jennifer also drops this, little bomb that he may or may not be a agent of Mephisto. We talked about how Mephisto was mentioned, but not exactly what context he was mentioned in. So let's dive in here on Mr. Nicholas Scratch. Because I did a little bit of research into who he is in the comics, because now he's been name dropped a couple of times, and I don't think he's necessarily going to be in this episode, but we're definitely going to explore his history and his relationship with his mother. So Nicholas Scratch in the comics, he is in fact her son. He has ties to the Fantastic Four, and he also is a follower of Dormammu at one point, which is interesting because we know we're going back to the dark dimension. Going back to last episode, we talked about how we were going to have a little bit more info for you on the Salem 7, and guess how excited I was when I found out the Salem 7 are Nicholas Scratch's children.
Oh my God.
So, now it becomes a whole little family affair of the Harkness tree now, doesn't it?
Okay. I'm speechless.
This is why we do the research.
Well, this is why I let Taylor do it sometimes, because you get these great moments where I've just been exposed for not doing it, but also I am like genuinely shocked. Okay. Some interesting things to add then, because throwing out my theory from last week, because that clearly is non existent, I would assume. I think Agatha knows.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, for sure. Because let me just say, she was very fearful of the Salem 7. And listen, they were freaky. I also would have been like, I'm not really loving this. I'm not really excited if I found out these weird demonic beings were coming after me. But I think I'd hate it a lot more if they were my grandchildren coming after me, probably because my son, who I literally traded for the Darkhold and has become possibly an agent of Mephisto, hates me so much and wants me dead. Like, maybe I'd be more, oh, this sucks, is really not great. I would want to run too. So that is a very interesting direction. I didn't think this would go. Also, I want to throw out there, everybody who's trying to say Tina's her son, go away.
It's wrong.
It's wrong. One, because there's no way he's Nicholas Sparks.
Scratch. Nicholas Scratch. Nicholas Sparks is an author, my friend.
And that's why I didn't do my research, and clearly why I don't know the names. Clearly he's not him, though. And he's also not Nicholas Sparks. He's not either of them. But also, we not only do assume who he is for a lot of other reasons, but I highly doubt, Agatha's had the Darkhold for years, guys.
Yeah.
This wasn't Wanda's little escapade with it, and she just was like, ha 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 ha, I'm gonna go find my sons across the multiverse, and whatever. No, Agatha's had this for years. And so I understand witches and warlocks don't necessarily age the same as others, but I'm gonna put a big I doubt that he'd be 16.
Yeah. I also just think, knowing that we know what's coming down the pipeline and we are missing a Wiccan-sized piece of our puzzle, why would we just not have Wiccan? It just doesn't make any sense.
That, but you've also just given us an antagonist.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? Because even her hallucination, which is the other half of this, is about the fact that it's a baby crying, and the next thing you know, she pulls that blanket back and it's the Darkhold, because she clearly gave her baby up. This wasn't a 8-year-old that she was mothering this whole time. No, she had a child and straight up gave it up for the Darkhold. So this baby is like gonna be angry growing up because worst comes to worst, he was probably even raised by Mephisto, which is literally the devil in Marvel Comics. So let's be real here. This is your antagonist. This is it right here.
Yeah, I mean, Agatha literally made a deal with the devil where she gave up her own child for power. So let that just sink in for a hot second, and then try being that child who, Mephisto, if I'm the devil, I'm telling that kid every day, your mom didn't want you. She wanted power more than she wanted you. So can you imagine the kind of poison that he grew up with in his head constantly? He's probably the most rageful and hateful person because he was raised by the literal devil potentially. He was not raised in what one would consider a normal, healthy, loving household, and he has trauma from his mother giving him up as a child. So this is not someone who is emotionally stable or healthy, and then he has his own children, to your point, trying to kill her and attack her. I'm curious about how Rio fits into all of this still, because that piece I'm not sure about, but when I read that the Salem Seven were the children of Nicholas Scratch, I was like, now things are starting to make sense, and now we're getting a little bit of direction.
I also wonder if somewhere in all this is tied to her first walk of the witch's road. Like, what'd she ask for the first time?
The Darkhold.
But if we know she traded her child for the Darkhold, and maybe, listen, maybe it's not Wizard of Oz like, and you don't get to just ask for something, you have to kind of sacrifice. And I understand that's just as much a possibility. But if it's the other way around, was it the Darkhold?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely could see a world where it doesn't sound like many people come back from walking the witch's road. Agatha seems like, in another aspect of her history, a little bit of an anomaly. They're all looking to her. Oh, you've already completed the road. So it could be a very well kept secret by the select few who survived the road. Because think about it, it is a deadly trap. We saw that in this episode. One character didn't make it out alive already. Now, granted, she wasn't magical, but still, one dead already. So, if you think about that, how many witches over the years have died on this road because they were unable to complete a trial? And it's not just one witch who dies if you aren't able to complete a trial. Like in this instance, they completed it and someone still died. But if they hadn't completed it, they all would have died and drowned. That's entire covens being wiped out at a time. So, the reason I bring this up is there are potentially very few people who know what it's actually like to ask for your quote unquote reward at the end. And maybe they're not telling people, by the way, you have to give up something like your child, your soul, something of extreme value in order to do it. It's not just, oh, here's your prize for completing the witch's road.
Well, Agatha also seemed most likely already willing to give things up because to all the points you just made, clearly her first coven was quite expendable to her.
Yeah.
Or maybe it wasn't. And maybe that was part of that moment for her where she kind of turned around in her life and she became more of a villain because she did lose her entire coven. Maybe they went on the witch's road for a completely different reason. Maybe they were under a different idea of why they were going on the witch's road. And in the meantime, she's the only one who survived. There's going to be somewhere that gives with Agatha because while I do love a good morally gray character slash villain turned good slash back to villain, whatever, while I do enjoy them, they always have a reason. They're not always just, I'm just bad. There's always a reason. Even our best villains. I mean, look at Thanos. At the end of the day, I'm pretty sure, low key, if we ever got desperate enough, if somebody was like, we could just kill half the population and we'd be good, I actually think people would agree. I see people on the internet to this day who agree that Thanos was right.
Well, let's not forget in the actual Hawkeye show, Hawkeye using a mug that says Thanos was right. It's written in bathrooms. There are actual canonical people in the MCU who think Thanos was right.
Exactly. So, and that's your big villain of the first three phases. So at the end of the day, they always have a reason for why they're doing it. He didn't think he was a bad person doing it. He genuinely was like, I'm saving the entire universe. That was his thought process. He thought he was a good guy. So I do wonder what that's going to be for Agatha, where we can kind of really see her and not what she puts forward and not who she's become, but why she's become this person And I know it deals with the baby. I know it deals with the Darkhold, and I'll put my bet it deals with the Witch's Road. But I don't know where those pieces fall quite yet, other than baby Darkhold trade.
What if what she asked for at the end of the road was the baby, but something really warped her?
I was thinking
And
that.
then she traded the baby for the Darkhold.
Well, because my other thing was you need a man to make a child. And Wanda found that loophole because obviously Vision wasn't doing anything. He's a microwave. And so at the end of the day, there are magical loopholes to this. Obviously, in the comics, we understand what Wanda's was, but in the MCU, it wasn't the same as the comics. If you're going to name drop Mephisto, like, hey, maybe Agatha's getting the Wanda edit from the comics.
Well, yeah, because here's the thing. Maybe it's road aside. Let's put that aside for a second. Maybe the original deal with the devil was I want a child. Makes the deal with the devil. Now she has to walk the road because the deal that maybe wasn't so clear was she has to give the child back. So then she walks the road. She doesn't get her baby back, and now she turns to the Darkhold. Maybe it's not that she traded. I'm just going to give her the benefit of the doubt here for a second. Maybe she didn't trade her kid for the Darkhold, but she, like Wanda, used the Darkhold in the hopes of finding her child from Mephisto. I think that's not something that we can totally take off the board yet, is that what warped her so greatly was that she made a deal with the devil, didn't read all the terms, and now she had to use the Darkhold to try to get her kid back. And instead, she became something very far from what she used to be.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options. Even when you don't give her the benefit of the doubt, I think these 3/3.5, if you are counting Mephisto as his own piece, fall together in a lot of different ways that spell the same story, however it comes out, and leads to where Agatha is now. Obviously, she's haunted to some degree about the fact that she let her kid go. We even see it when she's in the spell under Wanda. We see that she has feelings towards that. So I am intrigued to see how we get there. But our last topic we got to talk about. Rest in peace, Mrs. Hart. But I don't think she's dead.
Interesting. Say more.
Well, our fave girly, Deborah Jo Rupp, when interviewed, had to ask the interviewer, what part are you at? How much have you seen? And they said, only up through 4. And she said, well, just keep watching. I like Sharon's arc.
Interesting.
So is Miss Gurley dead? Because listen, I'm not gonna lie, I walked out of the episode and I was like, they just killed Mrs. Hart. But also, did I not say last episode, why would you even bother bringing her back just to kill her that way? It wasn't even a sacrifice. They just forgot to pluck her hair and put it in the potion, so the potion didn't work on her.
Oh, was that why? I thought they didn't get it to her in time.
No, I'm not gonna talk like I know facts. That was my assumption. Everybody else, you saw them pluck the hair, but then nobody ran over to Mrs. Hart to pluck her hair.
Interesting. I just thought it was so close that they never actually got it.
No, because I think she woke up.
Ah.
But the potion itself didn't actually, even inside of her, didn't work because she had no DNA inside of it.
Got it. That's a good call. I missed that.
Hey, sometimes I do notice things. Sometimes I don't.
You may not always do the research, but you got good eyes.
I do have good eyes. That's what I bring to the table. I see all the little things that Taylor doesn't see, but then she does all the research on the big stuff. So we're pretty even.
It's what makes us a dynamic duo.
It does. Yeah, you're correct. But again, I don't know if she's dead.
I am into that because I literally, for a little bit of context on how this went last night for us, because we're recording the day after, because it comes out late here on the East Coast. And Katie had FaceTimed me about something not related to the podcast. And so we're talking on the phone. We were both like, oh my gosh, so funny. I'm about to sit down and watch this show. I got distracted on my phone, so I was like 10 minutes after them.
Which is not my fault. I didn't know you were behind me.
No, so she was like, oh my God, this thing, Mephisto. And I was like, don't talk to me, I'm behind you. So then I'm a few minutes behind, but I'm texting her because I know she's already seen everything. So I'm like, oh my God, I love Mrs. Hart. She's my new favorite character. And Caitlin just goes, oh, keep watching. And I was like, oh no. And then they come down this slide and, Teen just goes, she's dead. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. She told me, but she didn't tell me.
I just can't think they so unceremoniously killed her. This is Deborah Jo Rupp. Let's not forget, she's carried the 2 episodes she was in. I don't mean to be rude, but I would rather her human sacrifice theory that you were throwing around than her just dying because of a potion mistake. But also, she's the only theoretically, going off of some of our theories from last week, but she's technically the only human.
Correct.
So maybe that's our loophole.
Yeah.
Because she can't actually really affect the road, right? Because at the end of the day, like, she can participate, but none of the trials are going to be about her. Like, it's just like how Teen was. He was helping, but the only thing he actually ended up helping, like, needing to be a part of, was they needed the blood of somebody that wasn't poisoned. Technically, I don't think Mrs. Hart needed to drink the poison. She just did. She was the first to drink it because nobody knew it was poison. She was like, oh my God, there's wine. Thank God.
Oh my God. In that moment, I was like, we are besties, and this is great.
She literally was like, this day can't get worse. Get out of my way. I get the first cup and I'm going to get the rest of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to get it when we're all done.
Yeah.
But like, it was an accident, right? Like, I don't know if she necessarily would have had to drink it because it knew Teen wasn't going to drink it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's almost like, can humans even really die on the road? Because this isn't meant to be for them. So the traps and things would not necessarily apply, potentially. Good question. Or does she come back as something significantly worse? I don't know. I am curious to see what this arc that Deborah Jo Rupp is talking about is, because I mean, it would actually be really interesting. You know, she's this bright, bubbly lady who had a little bit of a mentee bee during this particular episode. But at the same time, what if she comes back as something really dark and awful as a direct ramification of what's happening here?
Or going back to what I said last episode, or maybe I didn't say it in the episode, but I might have said it in the blog post. It's Rio. Mrs. Hart isn't actually Mrs. Hart. And so she lives because Rio is actually her and is a witch. But also, the stills for next episode are already out, and it looks like Miss Aubrey Plaza's in them.
Woot!
So,
How exciting.
I'm just going to say that's a possibility, but so are yours. The possibility she comes back as something worse or whatever, because her coven, even though she's not officially a part of it, failed her. But also, you asked the question earlier, and I think we can end on this. She's the first to die. Who's making it out of here?
I really hope all of them, because here's the thing. And we talked about this in our Witches background episode that was before the predictions. For this show and Agatha's Coven, they didn't just pick random names or random witches. They picked witches with distinct comic backgrounds.
Correct.
Some of which have really interesting ties to other characters and other concepts that are important moving forward. So to me, I don't know that you necessarily pick iconic witches if you're just going to kill them after one show.
A fair point, but it's not possible. Also, something you were kind of saying is we really only need each of the witches for their trial. So, while theoretically Jennifer is safe, she's not needed anymore. So she could get killed off in another trial. She already did hers. They passed hers.
This is true. That would make me sad because she's actually one of the witches that I really like. I like all of them, don't get me wrong, but her character specifically is one that I hope really makes it out of this show. So that one would like really bother me for many years if they killed her after a couple episodes of Agatha All Along.
I mean, fair. I'm just throwing them all out there that we've already supposedly seen a death. There's no telling that we're all walking out of this.
You make good points. I'm not going to lie.
I'm just doomsday planning. That's all.
I mean, am I going to be upset during this show? I'm sure. It just, it's a canon event.
Correct. Yeah, pretty much.
Well, on that super positive and really exciting note, we're going to call it for our Agatha All Along episode 3 reactions. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure that you are subscribing on your podcast platform of choice for the rest of Agatha All Along as we talk about the remaining episodes of the season. Also, please make sure that you're checking out the website. Again, as we always say, it's the hub to everything related to the show. And last but not least, want to point out again, if you are inclined to help support us, make the show better, and continue to grow, you can do what you want to do on Buy Me a Coffee. There are a few different options based on how much you want to contribute, and anything and everything is much appreciated. So please consider that if you are enjoying the show.
Go ahead and also give us a follow on all of our socials, which are linked below, including our YouTube, where on top of the podcast, we also have our weekly Sister Scoop news segments. So go ahead and subscribe to that as well. And we're back next week, episode 4 already of Agatha All Along. We're really, really excited. So stick with us and stick with Marvel, as Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.